My name is Calla Frost. I'm a lieutenant in the United States Navy, and I'm 34 years old. And last Tuesday, while sitting alone in my quarters on base, I checked a Powerball ticket I'd bought on a whim and discovered I had just won $50 million. My entire body went numb as I stared at those six numbers, lined up in a row of impossible, perfect alignment. But after the initial shock wore off, a cold, clear decision formed in my mind. I would not be telling a single person in my family about this money. You see, I have a long and exhausting history of being the emergency bailout fund for my family back in Ohio. If you're listening to this story, I'd love for you to take a moment and leave me a comment letting me know where you're listening from. Before I tell you about Operation Homecoming, the loyalty test I secretly designed to see who my real team was, go ahead and hit that like and subscribe button. Because this true story of betrayal and loyalty might just change the way you look at the people you call family, forever. The screen of my phone cast a sterile blue light across my room, illuminating the six numbers. $50 million. There was no shout of joy, no celebratory dance. As a logistics officer, my world revolves around order, process, and control. My brain didn't see a windfall. It saw a massive, unscheduled influx of assets requiring immediate strategic management. A silent, automatic checklist began to scroll through my mind. Engage legal counsel. Secure financial advisement. Establish security protocols. I sat on the edge of my perfectly made bed in my small Spartan room at Naval Base San Diego. Through the open window, the salty air carried the distant, rhythmic crash of waves against the shore. I was looking out at the endless Pacific Ocean, and in that moment of unimaginable fortune, I had never felt more alone. This sudden wealth wasn't a bridge connecting me to a new life. It was a chasm, separating me from everything I understood. The structure and meritocracy of the Navy had been my home, my family, my identity for over a decade. This money, this was chaos. Anarchy in numerical form. And so, the first question that clawed its way through the shock wasn't, what dream car will I buy? Or, where will I travel? It was a cold, pragmatic, and deeply sad question. Who can I trust? Before the sheer gravity of the number could fully register, another thought, sharp and clear as a command, cut through the noise. A test. A field exercise in loyalty. To run this drill, I needed the right bait. A crisis that was plausible, urgent, and emotionally charged. My mind landed on my last physical. The Navy doctor, scrolling through my chart, had pointed to a shadow on an old X-ray. Still got that little souvenir from the Gulf, Lieutenant, he'd said. A tiny piece of shrapnel lodged deep in the muscle near my spine. It was inert, harmless, a dormant piece of my past. But they didn't know that. It was the perfect pretense. The plan formed with military efficiency. I would call them, I would say the shrapnel had migrated, that it was now pressing against a nerve cluster. I would tell them I was facing a high-risk surgery with a long recovery, complicated by out-of-pocket expenses that my military insurance wouldn't fully cover. It was a complete fabrication, a carefully constructed lie. But it was a lie designed to excavate a truth I'd spent my entire adult life trying to ignore. My first call was to my father, Robert. The phone rang 3 times before he picked up, and I was immediately assaulted by the over-enthusiastic roar of a college football announcer. The Ohio State Buckeyes were playing. Of course, I could practically smell the beer and pretzels through the phone. Touchdown! The TV screamed in the background. Yeah, what is it? My father barked, his voice tight with the irritation of being pulled away from the game. I took a breath and laid out my story, my voice carefully measured to sound worried, but not hysterical. His response was immediate. Calla, are you sure these doctors aren't being overly dramatic? You know how those VA and military guys can be, he grunted. Look, just send me an itemized breakdown of the costs when you get it. I'll put it in a spreadsheet, run the numbers, and see if anything looks out of line. That was my father, the retired accountant. My life or death fear wasn't a matter for the heart, it was an invoice to be audited. Next, my mother, Eleanor. Her reaction was a masterclass in performative concern. A sharp intake of breath, a flurry of, "Oh, my sweet girl, oh, that's terrible." Her voice pitching higher with each empty sentiment. But the frantic energy lasted less than 30 seconds. Her tone shifted abruptly, becoming practical, almost brisk. "Well," she said, as if solving a simple household problem, "the first thing you should do is sell that car of yours. You've always said it was a gas guzzler." Just like that, she had identified an asset, liquidated it in her mind, and considered the problem solved. No offer of help, no questions about my well-being. Just a swift, clean, emotional amputation. The final call was to my sister, Megan, the marketing star in Chicago. She answered with a sigh so heavy and put upon I could feel its weight through the phone line. "Calla, honestly, this is just the worst possible timing," she said, her voice dripping with manufactured stress. "I have that huge international conference in Milan in 2 weeks. My career is at a critical point right now." Then came the line she always used, the verbal pat on the head that was meant to sound like a compliment but always landed like a dismissal. "But you'll be fine. You can handle it. You're the strong one." My strength, I realized, wasn't a quality they admired. It was a convenience they exploited. It was the justification they used to walk away. I hung up the phone, the silence in my room suddenly deafening. I walked to the window and pressed my forehead against the cool glass, watching the sun dip below the horizon, setting the sky on fire with streaks of orange and deep purple. The stunning beauty of the California sunset felt like a mockery. In my future bank account, an impossible fortune. In my heart, an emotional deficit so profound it felt like a black hole. My Aunt Carol, my mom's quiet, steadfast sister, often quoted a verse from Matthew to me. "For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also." It was a moment of terrible clarity. I finally understood that for the Frost family, their treasure was convenience, image, and their own self-interest. I was merely a resource, a reliable line of credit. The decision was no longer a thought. It was no longer a test. It was a mission directive. Operation Homecoming was now active, and I would execute it with the cold, unwavering precision of a soldier. There would be no more emotion. There would only be the truth. My mother's suggestion to sell the car was meant as a passing comment, a quick fix from 1,000 miles away. But for me, it was a key turning a lock on a room I'd kept sealed for 16 years. The memory inside was perfectly preserved, untouched by time, and just as painful as the day it was created. I was 18, and the humid Ohio summer was thick with the promise of freedom. My high school graduation was just a week away. More importantly, after graduation, I was promised the family's old sedan, a 10-year-old but reliable Ford Taurus. It was my ticket to the world, a symbol of adulthood. I'd spent hours dreaming of driving it to my summer job, of weekend trips with friends to Lake Erie. It represented a future I could finally steer myself. Then, 1 week before the ceremony, my older brother, Leo, the family's resident entrepreneur, came home with a gambling debt that threatened to swallow him whole. I remember my parents sitting me down at the kitchen table, their faces grim. My father cleared his throat and delivered the verdict. They were selling the Taurus to pay off Leo's debt. My mother put her hand on my arm, her touch light and meaningless. "Calla, honey, you're strong," she said, her voice laced with that familiar, hollow sympathy. "You can take the bus for the summer. Leo, he's fragile. He needs the family's help right now." I just sat there, numb. My strength was my punishment. His weakness was his reward. That summer, while Leo was given another fresh start, I worked double shifts at a local diner, the smell of grease clinging to my hair, saving every single dollar. At the end of August, I bought a beat-up, faded red Honda Civic with over 150,000 miles on it. It was the first lesson in what sacrifice meant in the Frost family. It was a one-way street, flowing from me outwards. The scars, I've learned, are not just singular events. They are patterns etched into you over time. 5 years ago, I was stationed in Japan. The work was demanding, the hours long, and I was deeply lonely. One night, my phone rang. It was Megan, hysterical. She'd broken up with her on-again, off-again boyfriend, and the world was ending. "Calla, I need you here," she sobbed. "I just need my sister." Like a soldier receiving orders, I didn't hesitate. I logged onto my computer, found the first available flight from Tokyo to Chicago, and spent nearly all of my savings on a last-minute economy class ticket. The next day, as I was in a taxi hurtling towards Narita Airport, my phone rang again. It was Megan, but the sobbing was gone. Her voice was bright, bubbly. "Oh my God, Calla, you're not going to believe it. We talked it all out and we're back together. Everything's amazing." She was laughing. I pulled the phone away from my ear for a second, looking at the blinking taximeter. "So, I guess you don't need to come home anymore," she chirped. "I'm so glad I caught you. I totally forgot to call sooner." She never asked about the ticket. She never considered the money I'd just spent. I was a problem to be solved, and when the problem vanished, so did the need for me. I stood in the middle of that chaotic foreign airport, a sea of strangers swirling around me, feeling a loneliness so profound it felt like a physical weight. My sacrifice wasn't just unappreciated, it was so insignificant that it was entirely forgotten. The deepest cuts, however, often come not from grand betrayals, but from small, deliberate acts of being made to feel invisible. I remember one Christmas when I was home on leave from basic training. Under the tree, amidst the glittering ornaments, was a sleek, silver box with Megan's name on it. Inside was a brand new MacBook Air, a tool to help her rising marketing career. For Leo, there was an envelope with a thick wad of cash, a little seed money to get back on his feet. My gift was the smallest. It was a small, neatly wrapped box. Inside were 2 pairs of thick, wool-blend socks, the kind you wear in combat boots. Tucked inside was a handwritten card from my mom. It read, "Dearest Calla, things are a little tight this year. Since you have a steady salary from the service, we knew you'd understand the need to be frugal. We love you. Save your money to help the family." I looked at the socks in my hands, then at Megan's gleaming laptop. The message was crystal clear. My stability wasn't a success to be celebrated, it was a resource to be tapped. The price of my independence was to be permanently relegated to the role of the dependable, low-maintenance daughter who required nothing and was therefore given nothing. Have you ever been in a situation like that? Where a gift, or the lack of one, sent a message so loud that it hurt more than any argument ever could? Let me know your story in the comments. And if you're finding this familiar, please hit that like button so I know I'm not alone. Each of these memories is a point on a map of my own emotional geography. And when I connected the dots that night in my room in San Diego, the picture that emerged was stark and undeniable. I wasn't a daughter or a sister. I was the safety net, the crisis manager, the low-risk investment that always paid out. The discipline and self-reliance I had worked so hard to build, the very qualities I was most proud of, were the same qualities my family used as a justification for their neglect. They knew I wouldn't fall, so they never felt the need to catch me. That's when a quote from a Brené Brown talk I'd once watched online surfaced in my mind. You can't ask for compassion from people who don't have the capacity to show it. It was a moment of painful acceptance. I couldn't change them. Expecting them to be different was a fool's errand. And standing there, looking back at the wreckage of my past, I knew this test I was conducting wasn't an act of anger. It was the logical, inevitable conclusion to a lifetime of being treated as a means to an end. It was an act of survival. My solitary path began at 0400 hours at Recruit Training Command, Great Lakes, Illinois. While my high school friends were navigating freshman orientation and frat parties, I was low-crawling under barbed wire in the freezing mud. Every muscle screamed, every joint ached, but a voice inside my head was louder than any drill instructor's bellow. You will do this. There is no one back home to call when you want to quit. The Navy didn't just forge me into a sailor. It gave me a replacement family, one that operated on a code of merit, trust, and shared hardship, not bloodlines and favoritism. That loneliness, the stark reality that I had no safety net, became my fuel. It was a strength born from having no other choice but to be strong. I wasn't just another recruit in the arena. I was Theodore Roosevelt's man in the arena. My face marred by dust and sweat and blood. striving valiantly because I had no other option. In my early years as an enlisted sailor, before I earned my commission, the pay was barely enough to survive on in a city as expensive as San Diego. But my financial obligations weren't just my own. The phone calls from Ohio were frequent and predictable. It was always my mother's voice, strained and worried, explaining some new crisis my brother Leo had manufactured. His car broke down. He had an unexpected medical bill. He needed capital for another can't-miss business idea. The conversations always ended the same way. Calla, could you just send a little something to help your brother out this month? So, I got a second job. After a full day of duty on base, I'd change out of my uniform and take the bus downtown to the gas lamp quarter. From 6 p.m. until midnight, 5 nights a week, I was a waitress at a bustling Italian restaurant. I remember those nights in a blur of exhaustion, the constant smell of garlic and fried calamari clinging to my hair, the ache in my feet so profound it felt like I was walking on glass. The hardest part was the bus ride back to base. I'd lean my head against the cool window, utterly spent, and watch cars full of families and couples laughing, heading home after a nice dinner out. No one on that bus knew that the tired waitress in the black apron was also a sailor in the United States Navy. And no one in my family, the ones cashing the checks I sent, ever considered the cost. They just knew the money arrived on time. I'll never forget the day I was commissioned as an officer. The ceremony was formal, steeped in tradition, a culmination of years of relentless effort. My uniform was crisp. My new gold bars gleamed on my collar. After the handshakes and congratulations, I didn't go out for a big celebration with a crowd. I got into my old, faded red Honda, the one I'd bought with diner money, and drove myself to a steakhouse in Little Italy, a place I'd always walked past but never dreamed of entering. I sat at a small table by myself. I ordered their best cut, a thick marbled ribeye, medium rare, and a glass of bold Cabernet Sauvignon. This wasn't just a meal. It was a declaration of independence. Every cent I paid for that steak was earned through my own sweat, my own discipline, and my own sleepless nights. I had earned this seat at this table. I had built this life for myself, brick by painful brick. It was a quiet, solitary victory, but the feeling of pride that washed over me was warmer and more powerful than any empty praise my family could have ever offered. It was real. It was mine. And it was something they could never give me, and could never, ever take away. That first officer's paycheck was more money than I'd ever seen at one time. I didn't go on a shopping spree. I didn't upgrade my car. The first thing I did was go to a small gift shop and buy a delicate silver locket. I put it in a box and mailed it to my Aunt Carol. She was the only person who had sent me a card, a simple Hallmark card with a $10 bill tucked inside when I'd first left for boot camp. The memory of that small kindness had sustained me through so many difficult moments. My gift to her wasn't just a thank you. It was an acknowledgement of a true, unconditional alliance. Later that evening, after my solitary celebratory dinner, I sat in my car in the restaurant's parking lot, looking out at the lights of the harbor. The loneliness I'd felt earlier had been replaced by a quiet sense of accomplishment. I scrolled through the contacts on my phone, my thumb hovering over the familiar names: Dad, Mom, Megan, Leo. I felt nothing but a dull, tired ache. I kept scrolling, and then my thumb stopped. Jenna. My best friend from high school. We hadn't spoken in months, lost in the currents of our own busy lives. A wave of hesitation washed over me. What if it was awkward? What if we had nothing to say? I pushed the doubt aside and pressed the call button. She picked up on the second ring. Calla Frost, what corner of the world are you in now? Her voice was exactly the same, warm, a little loud, and completely genuine. There was no judgment, no agenda, just pure, uncomplicated friendship. In that single sentence, a pressure I didn't even realize I'd been carrying for years began to release. For the first time in a long, long time, I felt like I could finally breathe. Jenna, I said, a small smile spreading across my face. I'm in San Diego. Hey, are you free this weekend? That phone call was the first step off my deserted island. It was a signal flare, a call for rescue, and the first move in building a new kind of family. We met at a small coffee shop in La Jolla, the kind of place with mismatched chairs and local art on the walls, overlooking the Pacific. I got there early, my stomach churning with a nervous energy I hadn't felt in years. When Jenna walked in, she scanned the room, and her face broke into a grin that was so familiar it made my chest ache. She rushed over and wrapped me in a hug so tight I could feel the years of distance melt away. She pulled back, holding me by the shoulders, her brow furrowed with genuine concern. "God, Calla, you're too thin," she said. It was the first thing out of her mouth, and the simple, maternal observation, something my own mother had never once said, nearly brought me to tears. We sat for hours, a pot of coffee growing cold between us. I told her everything. Well, almost everything. I left out the winning lottery ticket, but I poured out the rest. The crushing pressure of my job, the profound disconnect with my family, the gnawing feeling that I was adrift, untethered to anything or anyone. I told her about the fake surgery, the test I was running, and the depressingly predictable results. Jenna didn't offer a single platitude or easy solution. She just listened. She nodded, her eyes never leaving mine, and in her steady gaze, I saw the message I had been desperate to receive. I hear you. I believe you. You are not crazy. That feeling of being truly seen, of being validated, was like an anchor dropping in the middle of my own internal hurricane, holding me steady for the first time in a long time. That Sunday, she showed up at my bare-bones apartment on base. She wasn't empty-handed. In her arms, she held a large Tupperware container. "Ta-da!" she announced, placing it on my small kitchen counter. "Except no substitutes. This is my grandma's authentic Cincinnati chili recipe." She lifted the lid, and the air filled with the rich, unmistakable aroma of cinnamon, cloves, and a hint of unsweetened chocolate, the signature scent of our shared Ohio roots. It was just a simple meal, but it was so much more than that. It was a message, delivered through food. I remember who you are and where you come from. That night, we sat on the floor of my living room, eating chili over spaghetti with a mountain of shredded cheddar cheese, just like we did when we were kids. We put on an old movie, some dumb 80s comedy we had both seen 100 times, and we laughed until our sides hurt. For the first time in over a decade, I didn't feel like Lieutenant Frost, the capable officer. I wasn't Calla, the family ATM. I was just Cassie, my childhood nickname, sitting with my best friend. The loneliness that had been my constant companion began to feel a little less suffocating. In the Navy, the SEALs have a saying, "Never fight alone." I was beginning to understand that it applied to life outside of combat, too. I was building my own unit. A few days later, still riding that small wave of hope, I decided to make another call. This time, to my Aunt Carol. She was my mother's younger sister, a retired nurse living a quiet life in a small Ohio town. I told her the same fabricated story I told the others, bracing myself for another round of disappointment. Her reaction was profoundly different. There was no panic, no platitudes, no unsolicited financial advice. She was silent for a long moment, just listening. Then her voice came through the line, calm and steady as a lighthouse beam in a storm. "Cassie," she said, using the name only she and Jenna ever used. "How much do you need? I've got a little in my retirement savings. I can wire it to you today. Don't you worry for 1 second about paying it back." I was stunned into silence. Aunt Carol, a woman living on a fixed nurse's pension, was willing to give me everything she had without a moment's hesitation, no questions asked. The generosity was so pure, so unconditional, it felt like a physical blow. It laid bare the transactional nature of my relationship with my parents and siblings in the most brutal way. "Aunt Carol, no, that's not necessary." I finally managed to choke out, my throat thick with emotion. I just needed to hear your voice." "I'm always here for you, sweetheart," she said softly. "Anytime." That phone call was a beacon. It was proof that true loyalty, true family, wasn't a myth. It just lived in a different place than I'd been looking. For the rest of that week, a strange sense of peace settled over me. I had my unit, Jenna and Aunt Carol. Hope, A feeling I'd long since written off as a liability began to cautiously bloom in my chest. Maybe I could build a new life, a chosen family, anchored by these two incredible women. And then my phone rang. The caller ID flashed. Mom! The fragile piece shattered instantly. I answered, and her voice was different. The superficial worry from our last call was gone, replaced by a tone that was slick with calculation. Calla, honey, your father and I have been thinking, she began. If you're really in a tight spot financially with this surgery coming up, perhaps you should consider signing over that small inheritance your grandmother left you. Give it to Leo. I couldn't speak. She was talking about a small plot of land, a few acres of woods my grandma had left specifically to me. It wasn't worth much, but it was the only thing I had that was truly mine. A link to the one person in my childhood who had always made me feel seen. After all, my mother continued, her voice sickeningly sweet, you're single, no dependents to worry about. Your brother, on the other hand, he needs this capital to finally get his life on track. The warmth I had felt just moments before turned to ice in my veins. The shadow of my family, long and dark and greedy, was stretching all the way from Ohio to California, threatening to blot out the small patch of sunlight I had just found. Sign over the inheritance? I repeated the words slowly, the question hanging in the air between San Diego and Ohio. The line was quiet, but I could feel my mother's expectant smile on the other end. She was talking about the only piece of my grandmother I had left. A small 5-acre plot of undeveloped woodland in rural Ohio. It had no real monetary value, but its sentimental value was immeasurable. It was the place my grandmother taught me to identify constellations, the place I'd felt safe as a child. Yes, sweetie, my mother's voice oozed, sickly sweet. Your brother Leo has this very promising new business venture. It's a sure thing this time. This could be the opportunity that finally lets him stand on his own 2 feet. And when you help your brother, you're helping the whole family. My blood ran cold. They had always come for my money, my time, my energy. But this was different. This was an invasion. They were no longer just drawing from my present, they were now attempting to seize my past, to liquidate my memories for another one of Leo's failing schemes. They wanted to strip me of everything, all in the name of family. I felt a strange sense of detachment, as if I were a strategist observing an enemy's flanking maneuver. In his book The Gift of Fear, Gavin de Becker writes about trusting your intuition, recognizing the pre-incident indicators that signal danger. My intuition wasn't just whispering anymore, it was screaming. They weren't just neglectful, they were predators, and they had scented weakness. A few days later, my father called. The audit was apparently complete, and now it was time for the lecture. There was no talk of football scores this time. His voice was somber, authoritative, the voice he used when he was about to impart what he considered profound wisdom. Calla, your mother told me about the idea with the land, he began, no preamble. I think it's a very logical course of action. In a family, everyone has a role to play. Your role has always been to be the stable support pillar. You can't let temporary personal emotions jeopardize the structural integrity of this family. Structural integrity. He spoke of our family as if it were a building, and I was nothing more than a load-bearing wall, a cold piece of concrete whose only purpose was to hold everyone else up. My feelings weren't valid, they were a threat to the foundation. I listened in silence, my knuckles turning white as I gripped the phone, the plastic groaning under the pressure. I said nothing. My silence had always been my shield, but I was beginning to realize it was also my consent. The full-scale psychological operation began the next day, orchestrated by Megan. The text messages started arriving. Not 1 or 2, but a steady, calculated drip campaign of manipulation. They were never direct inquiries about my health. Instead, they were saccharine missives designed to chip away at my resolve. Hey sis, I know you're going through a lot, but just think of it this way. Helping Leo succeed is really an investment in your own future too. Then came the photos, blurry, digitized pictures from our childhood. The 3 of us on a swing set, squinting into the sun. The 3 of us in ugly Christmas sweaters. Each one came with a caption like, "Missing our family so much today." Or, remember how we always had each other's backs? It was a textbook campaign, a masterclass in guilt and nostalgia, designed to remind me of a past that never actually existed. The most insulting one came on a Wednesday afternoon. It was a link to a Forbes article titled, "Effective Strategies for Managing Medical Debt." Beneath it, Megan had typed, "Thought this might be helpful for you. Love you." That feigned act of concern, so transparently self-serving, was more painful than any of their overt demands. It was a cold, sharp blade disguised as a helping hand. They didn't see a sister in crisis. They saw a financial problem that needed to be managed, and they were annoyed that I wasn't managing it in a way that benefited them. The final straw came on Friday night. My phone rang, and it was Megan again, her voice buzzing with an excitement that made my skin crawl. "Calla, great news! I just got off the phone with Leo, and we worked everything out." I waited, my silence a dead weight on the line. "So," she continued, her voice practically singing, "if you agree to sign over the land, he's promised to give you 5% of the company's future profits. See? It's a win-win." 5%. I remained silent, processing the sheer audacity. They were offering me a 5% stake in my own goodwill. They were haggling with me over the price of my grandmother's memory, as if it were a used car on a lot. They had taken my fabricated crisis and turned it into a business negotiation. This was the moment the last of my illusions crumbled to dust. There was no line they wouldn't cross, no memory they wouldn't sell, no piece of me they wouldn't try to claim as their own. "Megan," I said, my voice interrupting her cheerful monologue. It sounded foreign to my own ears, flat, cold, and devoid of any warmth. "I'll have to think about it." I hung up before she could respond. Think about it? No. There was nothing left to think about. They had made their positions clear, and in doing so, they had just given me my own. The silence I had maintained for so long wasn't strength anymore. It was complicity, and it was over. After I hung up the phone, the quiet of my apartment was suffocating. The air felt thick, heavy. I couldn't sit. I couldn't stand still. A raw, kinetic anger, hotter than any furnace, was surging through me, demanding release. I felt like a live wire, sparking and dangerous. Without thinking, I grabbed my keys, bolted out of the apartment, and started walking. My strides long and aggressive, heading blindly towards Coronado Beach. The night air was sharp and cold, a damp Pacific wind cutting through my thin shirt. But it was no match for the inferno blazing in my gut. 5%. The number was a relentless drumbeat against the inside of my skull, matching the hard, punishing rhythm of my boots on the pavement. 5%. They had commodified my love. They had quantified my grandmother's memory and decided it was worth a paltry 5% of some imaginary future profit from one of Leo's guaranteed-to-fail schemes. Did they see me as a fool? A simple-minded child so desperate for a scrap of their approval that I would trade my soul for it. Every step on the sand was a fresh indictment. For years, they had taken my money, siphoning off my hard-earned paychecks to plug the leaks in their irresponsible lives. They had taken my time, pulling me into their endless vortex of manufactured crises. They had taken my strength, the very discipline they'd never bothered to cultivate in my siblings, and used it as a convenient excuse for their own neglect. And now, sensing I was cornered, believing I was financially crippled and emotionally broken, they came for the last thing I had left that was pure. They came for my dignity. I reached the water's edge where the black waves, tipped with angry white foam, crashed and churned in the darkness. It was a perfect mirror for the chaos inside me, and I let go. I opened my mouth and screamed. It wasn't a word. It was the sound of 34 years of swallowed anger, of bitten back words, of silent tears. A raw, guttural cry of grief and fury that tore from my throat. The roar of the surf met it, embraced it, and swallowed it whole. No one else on the planet heard it. But I did. And in the ringing silence that followed, I knew I had finally heard my own voice. The fight suddenly evacuated my body, leaving me weak and hollow. I sank to my knees on the cold, damp sand, the fight replaced by a profound, desolate despair. I watched the waves, a relentless cycle of advance and retreat, of power and surrender. For years, that had been me, rushing in to fix, to pay, to solve, only to be dragged back out, a little more of myself eroded with each tide. "I'm done," I whispered, the words barely audible against the wind. "I am done." My entire life had been an exercise in following their rules. Be the good daughter, be the responsible sister, be the disciplined soldier. I had adhered to the unwritten code of conduct they had established for me from birth. But I saw it clearly now, illuminated by the harsh light of their greed. The game had always been rigged. The Frost family rulebook had only one central clause, written in invisible ink on every page. Calla will sacrifice. Calla will provide. Calla will endure. Calla will not complain. Well, tonight I was setting that book on fire. Tonight I was writing my own rules of engagement. I was no longer an enlisted soldier blindly following orders in their dysfunctional chain of command. As of this moment, I was the commanding officer of my own life. The unofficial motto of the Navy is Semper Fortis, always courageous. Standing there, shivering in the cold, I finally understood what it meant. Courage wasn't just about facing enemy fire in a war zone. True courage was facing the insidious enemies in your own life, the ones who claim to love you while they systematically dismantle you piece by piece. The walk back to my apartment was different. I was physically exhausted, but my spirit felt light, unburdened. I switched on a lamp, and its soft glow fell across a small silver frame on my nightstand. It was a picture of my Aunt Carol, taken at a family picnic years ago. Her smile was so genuine, her eyes crinkling at the corners with a warmth that felt real, even through the glass. The woman who had so little, yet was ready to give it all. Her image stood in stark, painful contrast to them, my parents, my siblings, who had everything they needed, yet only ever wanted more. That single silent image obliterated any lingering shred of doubt, any whisper of guilt that tried to creep back in. This was never about the money. This fight was for my aunt, whose unconditional love was a treasure beyond any lottery prize. It was for the heartbroken 18-year-old girl who had to buy her own beat-up car. It was for the lonely sailor who stood abandoned in the middle of Narita Airport. I was fighting for my own goddamn dignity. This was my breaking point, the precise moment I knew I could not stay silent for one more day. Have you ever had a moment like that? A final straw that changed everything? If you have, I want you to go to the comments right now and just type the words, "I'm done." That's it. Let me know you understand this feeling. And please hit that like button if you believe it's time for Calla to fight back. My hand, now perfectly steady, reached for my phone. My movements were deliberate, purposeful. I scrolled past their names without a flicker of hesitation. My fingers stopped on a contact I'd saved the day I won. A name I knew would be a strategic asset. Harrison Beck, Estate Law. It was time to activate the next phase of the operation. It was well past midnight in San Diego, but protocol could wait. I pressed the call button, fully expecting to get his voicemail to leave a message that would start the process in the morning. But on the third ring, a calm professional voice answered, crisp and alert. "Harrison Beck." I took a deep, steadying breath. My voice, when it came out, was clear and strong, with no trace of the storm that had just raged through me. "Mr. Beck," I said, "this is Lieutenant Calla Frost. I need to schedule an immediate consultation. We have a campaign to deploy." The next morning, I walked into the law offices of Harrison Beck. His firm occupied the entire top floor of a glass skyscraper in downtown San Diego. The panoramic view of the city and the bay was breathtaking, a world of power and influence far removed from my government-issue apartment. But I wasn't there to admire the scenery. I was there to plan a war. Harrison Beck was a man in his late 60s, with a ramrod-straight posture and a handshake that spoke of his years in the Marine Corps. He listened to my entire story, from the lottery ticket to Megan's 5% offer, without a single interruption. His face was impassive, his eyes sharp and analytical. When I finished, he leaned back in his leather chair, steepling his fingers. "Lieutenant," he said, his voice a calm baritone, In the Marines, we have a term for what you just did. It's called reconnaissance by fire. You sent out a few rounds, drew the enemy out of their entrenched positions, and confirmed their hostile intent. For the first time in this whole ordeal, I felt a profound sense of relief. He got it. He spoke my language. This wasn't just a messy family drama to him, it was a tactical situation requiring a clear objective and a decisive strategy. In that moment, his luxurious, mahogany-paneled conference room ceased to be a lawyer's office. It became my operations center, my war room. My entire life had been an exercise in the ODA loop, the decision-making cycle that's drilled into every military officer. Observe, orient, decide, act. For years, I had been stuck in the first two phases, observing the dysfunction, orienting myself to the painful reality. That night on the beach, I had made my decision. Now, it was time to act. Under Mr. Beck's expert guidance, we began to build my arsenal. We started to weaponize the truth. Step 1. Secure the asset. The $50 million is a tactical advantage, not the objective, Mr. Beck stated. We protect it first. Within hours, he had initiated the process of placing the winnings into a series of carefully structured, anonymous trusts. He explained that this would make the money virtually invisible and legally untouchable, shielding it from any future claims or attempts at emotional extortion. The island of my wealth was now a fortified position. Step 2. Consolidate intelligence. This was my task. I spent the next 2 days methodically gathering every piece of digital correspondence. I forwarded every manipulative email and text message from Megan to a secure folder Mr. Beck had created. I transcribed my memories of the phone calls with my parents, noting the date, the time, and the exact phrasing of their demands and dismissals. The words that had once been instruments of pain were now being transformed. They were no longer just hurtful comments. They were evidence. Exhibit A. Father's dismissal of my health in favor of a football game. Exhibit B. Mother's demand to sell my car. Exhibit C. Megan's insulting 5% offer. Each piece of data was another round of ammunition. Step 3. Plan for Allied support. While compiling the case against my family, we also drafted a completely separate plan, codenamed Aunt Carol. It was a comprehensive financial strategy designed to quietly and completely secure her future. We would pay off her mortgage, establish an annuity that would more than double her retirement income, and arrange for long-term care insurance. It would all be done anonymously, a gift from a so-called military benevolent fund. She would never have to worry about money again. Securing my true ally was paramount to the mission's success. By Thursday afternoon, our preparations were nearly complete. Mr. Beck looked at me across the vast conference table. The final piece of the puzzle, Lieutenant, air support. Do you need backup in this meeting? I knew immediately who he meant. I needed someone in my corner who wasn't on the payroll. I needed Jenna. That evening, I called her and finally told her the whole, unvarnished truth. I told her about the lie, the shrapnel that was perfectly fine, and then I told her about the Powerball ticket. There was a long, stunned silence on the other end of the line. I held my breath, my stomach twisting. Then she let out a low whistle. "Calla Frost," she said, her voice a mixture of shock and awe. "You are completely insane, a brilliant, crazy, beautiful lunatic. Of course I'll be there. I'll wear my best, don't mess with my friend dress. Just tell me when and where." Knowing Jenna would be there, a friendly face on a hostile screen, solidified my resolve. I would not be walking onto this battlefield alone. That night, I sat at my computer, the strategic plan complete. It was time to issue the summons. I composed a new email. The recipient list a familiar roster of pain. Dad, Mom, Megan, Leo. The subject line was stark and official. Urgent family meeting notification. The body of the email was brief and stripped of all emotion. It was a direct order. A mandatory family video conference will be held this Saturday at 1900 hours Pacific Standard Time. Agenda: the future of our financial and personal relationships. Your attendance is required. I didn't offer a choice. I didn't ask for their availability. I didn't explain the urgency. For the first time in my life, I wasn't asking. I was telling. I could already picture their reactions, the annoyance, the confusion, the indignation at being summoned by me. They had no idea they weren't being invited to a family meeting. They were being subpoenaed to appear at a hearing where I would be the judge. My cursor hovered over the send button. This was the final step, the signal that the battle was about to begin. I clicked it. The order had been given. The engagement was set. At precisely 1900 hours on Saturday, my cursor hovered over the link. I took one final, steadying breath and clicked. My screen blinked, then fractured into a grid of familiar faces. One by one, they populated the boxes. My father and mother appeared first, sharing a frame from the floral couch in their Ohio living room, their expressions already set in a familiar mask of parental annoyance. My father's arms were crossed, a clear sign he felt his valuable time was being wasted. Next came Megan, dialing in from her sleek, sterile apartment in Chicago. She was already tapping a pen against her desk, a portrait of corporate impatience. Finally, Leo's face flickered into view, looking haggard and unshaven, the low-angle lighting suggesting he was calling from a friend's basement couch. I, however, had meticulously staged my environment. I was seated at my desk in my home office, wearing my immaculate Navy service dress white uniform, the one reserved for formal occasions. The gold officer bars on my collar gleamed under the focused light of my desk lamp. Behind me, perfectly centered and draped with military precision, was the American flag. There would be no ambiguity today about who held the authority in this room. Thank you all for attending, I began, my voice intentionally flat, perfectly level, devoid of any emotional inflection. It was the detached professional tone I used to deliver a mission briefing. This meeting will not be long. I have several announcements to make. The sudden, stark formality of it all clearly unnerved them. I saw my mother shift on the couch, her hands fluttering nervously in her lap. Megan stopped her incessant tapping. Even Leo seemed to sit up a little straighter. They had expected a tearful, desperate phone call, not a formal summons. First, I continued, my gaze fixed directly on the camera lens, as if I could see through it and into each of their eyes. Regarding my health, the surgery I mentioned will not be happening. After a final consultation, the doctors have concluded that the shrapnel poses no immediate threat and that surgical intervention is unnecessary at this time. Consequently, the financial crisis I alluded to is non-existent. A wave of visible, almost comical relief washed over their faces. I saw my mother's shoulders sag as she placed a hand on her chest. Leo let out a quiet whoosh of air. But their relief was instantly replaced by a sharp, collective confusion. I had just removed the very crisis that was the supposed reason for this meeting. They were here to negotiate the terms of my surrender, and I had just informed them there was no war. However, I said, my voice dropping a fraction of a decibel, the edge of it sharpening to a fine point. The test I conducted did, in fact, yield a diagnosis. Not of my spine, but of the terminal condition of this family. I let my eyes drift slowly from one video box to the next, a commander reviewing her troops. Over the past week, while facing what I presented as a life-altering medical emergency, not one of the four of you asked me a single, fundamental human question. Are you scared? The silence that followed was thick, heavy, and accusatory. My words hung in the virtual space between us, undeniable and damning. Instead, my voice was now as cold and hard as steel. I received a demand for a spreadsheet to audit my pain. I received a business proposal to liquidate the only memento I have from my grandmother. And from my sister, I received a generous offer of 5% of the profits from my own coerced generosity. I paused again, letting the weight of their individual actions settle upon them. I turned my gaze to my father's window on the screen, isolating him. Dad, you asked for an itemized breakdown, so I prepared one. A full cost-benefit analysis of our relationship, just as you would. I glanced down at a blank piece of paper on my desk, for effect. Costs incurred by me. Approximately 15 years of unconditional financial support. consistent personal sacrifice for the sake of others' comfort, and significant, cumulative emotional distress. The benefits to me, I'm afraid, came out to a perfectly round number: 0. My father's face, usually ruddy with the self-satisfaction of a man who believes he's always right, turned a blotchy, pale white. His mouth opened, then snapped shut like a fish out of water. Megan was the first to recover, her voice shrill with panicked defensiveness. Calla, what is this? What are you talking about? We were just worried about you. We were trying to help. Worry? I cut her off, my voice lashing out like a whip. Let me define worry for you, Megan. Worry is your Aunt Carol, a retiree on a fixed income, offering to drain her life savings for me without a second of hesitation. That is concern. What the four of you did has another name. It's called exploitation. The dam finally broke. A chaotic cacophony of indignant denials and flimsy justifications erupted from my speakers. How could you say such a thing? My mother cried, her voice cracking with practiced victimhood. We are your family. Leo was muttering something about being misunderstood, about his good intentions. I raised my hand, a simple, commanding gesture. The authority in my uniform, in my posture, in the sheer, unshakable force of my will, sliced through the noise and silenced them instantly. I had their full, terrified attention. I thought of Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, a woman whose quiet, formidable resolve had reshaped the world. Today, I would reshape mine. This is not a debate, I stated, my voice low and absolute. This is a notification. I took a deep, centering breath. The final payload was armed. 3 weeks ago, I won the Powerball jackpot, $50 million. Absolute, profound, electronic silence. The digital space crackled with it. I watched their faces cycle through a rapid-fire series of emotions. First, pure disbelief. Then, jaw-dropping shock. And then, finally, the one raw, honest emotion I had ever seen from them. The naked, predatory gleam of avarice in their eyes. My mother's mouth hung open, a silent, stunned, "Oh." Leo physically jolted upright in his chair, his eyes wide with a desperate, calculating light. Megan looked like she'd been struck by lightning, her carefully composed mask of corporate success utterly shattered. I let them hang in that agonizing, greedy silence for 3 full seconds before delivering the final, decisive blow. That money, I said, my voice clear and final, has been secured in an ironclad anonymous trust, and not a single one of you is named in it. This hearing is adjourned. I didn't wait for a response. I didn't give them the satisfaction of a single word. My mouse moved with swift, surgical precision. I clicked the red End Meeting button, plunging them back into their own separate, silent worlds, leaving them alone with nothing but the rubble of their greed and the stunning, deafening truth. The moment I clicked End Meeting, a profound, echoing silence filled my office. The adrenaline that had coursed through me, sharp and clean, began to recede, leaving a deep, bone-weary exhaustion in its wake. There was no triumphant fist pump, no celebratory cheer. Winning a war against your own family doesn't feel like a victory. It feels like a tragedy. Then, my phone, which I had set on my desk, began to vibrate. It didn't just vibrate, it convulsed, buzzing and lighting up like a frantic alarm. A relentless barrage of calls and texts. The aftershock. I picked it up and looked at the screen. Dozens of missed calls. A torrent of text messages. I opened my voicemail and listened. My mother's voice came through first, thick with theatrical tears, accusing me of having a cruel streak and tearing this family apart. Then came my father, not a voicemail, but a long, rambling email with the subject line, "Your irrational and damaging actions." In it, he logically broke down how my decision was detrimental to the long-term structural integrity of the Frost family unit. Leo sent a series of desperate, misspelled texts, pleading for a chance to explain, promising this time he would change. But the message that truly captured the essence of their delusion came from Megan. It was a single, concise text that landed with chilling clarity. "You cannot do this to us, Calla. You are destroying this family's reputation. Have you even stopped to think what people will say? There it was. In the midst of a cataclysmic family implosion, her primary concern was public relations. Not the relationships, not the pain, but the optics. I stared at her message, and I didn't feel anger anymore. I just felt nothing. A vast, quiet emptiness. I pressed the power button on the side of my phone, holding it down until the screen went black. Their storm was no longer my storm to weather. The next morning, Jenna met me at my favorite coffee shop, the one in La Jolla. She brought a large coffee for me and a croissant, setting them on the table like a peace offering. "You, Calla Frost, are a rock star," she said with a wide grin. I would have paid good money to have been a fly on the wall for that call. Her humor was a balm, but then her expression softened. "So, what now? Are you just going to cut them off completely? Go full no contact?" I thought about it for a moment, swirling the coffee in my cup. "No," I said, the answer feeling clear and right. "A complete cutoff is an emotional reaction. I'm done with emotional reactions. From now on, I'm proceeding strategically." I looked up and met her eyes. "I'm establishing a new set of rules of engagement." Jenna leaned forward, intrigued. "My relationship with them will now be diplomatic," I explained. "It will be polite, it will be distant, and it will be based on demonstrated respect. If they cross a boundary, I will disengage. No more emergency calls will be answered. No more financial bailouts will be issued. The door isn't slammed shut and bolted, but it will be guarded. Heavily." That afternoon, I sat down at my computer to compose one final document. It was an email addressed to all four of them. Writing it, I felt a strange sense of calm. The anger had burned away, leaving only the hard, clear truth. I wrote that my decision was not an act of punishment, but an act of self-preservation. I thought of the Serenity Prayer, a simple piece of wisdom that suddenly felt profound. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. I could not change them. That was a fact I now accepted. But I had the courage to change the terms of my interaction with them. For years, I typed, "I have served as this family's safety net. Now, I need to be my own." I ended the letter by stating that a part of me would probably always love them, but that my love was no longer a blank check for them to cash. I then laid out the new boundaries, the rules of engagement, with the clarity of a military directive. All non-emergency communication will be scheduled in advance. The topic of my personal finances is now permanently off limits. Any future relationship will be rebuilt slowly, from the ground up, based on actions, not on words or familial obligation. After I hit send, a weight I hadn't even realized I was carrying, a massive, invisible pack filled with 34 years of guilt and obligation, lifted from my shoulders. It was the painful, liberating feeling of a necessary amputation. The limb was gone, and it hurt, but I knew I could finally heal. Later that evening, as the sun began to set, I made one last call. A different kind of call. I dialed Harrison Beck. "Mr. Beck," I said when he answered, "it's Calla Frost. I'd like you to execute the plan for my Aunt Carol." The plan was simple, but beautiful in its efficiency. It involved a series of anonymous transactions that would pay off the remaining balance on her mortgage. It established a trust that would fund an annuity, ensuring she had a comfortable and worry-free retirement. And it included a first-class, open-ended plane ticket to San Diego, valid anytime. A single card would be sent with the initial paperwork. It would have no explanation, no grand announcement. It would just say, "To my most loyal teammate, I love you, Calla." This final action wasn't about the money. It was about redeploying my assets. I was divesting from the toxic, failing enterprise of my biological family and investing deeply, wholly, in the chosen family that had proven its worth. I was building a harbor where loyalty was met with loyalty and where love was not a liability, but the ultimate, most precious treasure. A year has passed. The scene is different now. I'm no longer in a stark, temporary room on a naval base. I'm standing in the backyard of a small, charming house in Coronado, the kind with a sun-drenched garden that smells of salt and roses. In front of me, a row of sunflowers stands tall, their bright yellow faces turned towards the endless blue of the Pacific Ocean. I'm wearing jeans and a simple t-shirt, not a uniform. Next to me, my Aunt Carol is kneeling, gently tending to a bed of tomato plants. She moved in 6 months ago, after a lot of gentle persuading. Her laughter, a sound I hadn't realized how much I'd missed, has become the daily soundtrack of my new life. She pats the soil around a fledgling plant, her hands wrinkled but steady. "You see, Cassie," she says, looking up at me with a smile, "things only bloom in good soil." Her words are simple, but they land with the weight of a profound truth, a perfect metaphor for the life I'm now carefully, lovingly cultivating. Jenna comes over most weekends, bringing loud, chaotic stories from her middle school classroom and a bottle of cheap, cheerful wine. The three of us have become our own small unit, a family forged not by blood but by choice, respect, and home-cooked meals eaten on the back porch. My relationship with my family in Ohio still exists, but it's been renegotiated to a safe, diplomatic distance. There are occasional scheduled phone calls on holidays. Polite birthday cards are exchanged. There is no more drama. No more pleas for money. No more emotional warfare. There is only a quiet, mutual acceptance of the boundaries I drew. They stay on their side of the line, and I stay on mine. It is not warm, but it is peaceful. And after a lifetime of turmoil, I have come to value peace above all else. The lottery winnings didn't sit untouched in a vault. Money, like a soldier, needs a mission. So, I used a significant portion of it to establish a nonprofit foundation. I called it the Homecoming Fund. Its mission is simple: to provide a safety net for service members and their families as they transition out of the military. We offer financial counseling, job placement assistance, and emergency grants for those who find themselves in a crisis with no one to call. My own painful experience of feeling utterly alone, of having no real support structure waiting for me back home, became my new purpose. I was no longer a soldier fighting a war. I was now a soldier building a peace, ensuring that no one who had served their country ever had to feel as abandoned as I once did. A few months ago, I got a call from Harrison Beck. He was providing a routine update on the fund's activities. He mentioned that one of our anonymous, low-interest small business loans had just been approved, saving a fledgling tech startup in Ohio from bankruptcy. The name of the founder, he noted, was Calla Frost. The fund had provided him with the capital he always wanted, but it also paired him with a mandatory business mentor, a retired executive who would hold him accountable. Leo will never know where the money came from. He will only know that he was finally given a chance to succeed on merit, not manipulation. I have made similar arrangements, quiet and indirect, for my parents and for Megan, using the intricate legal structures Mr. Beck designed to ensure their long-term stability without ever involving me directly. A trust that supplements my parents' retirement fund. An anonymous grant that funded a career-advancing certification for Megan. This was not forgiveness, not in the traditional sense. It was not about absolving them of their actions. It was about my own liberation. I help them now not because they are entitled to it, or even because they deserve it. I help them because I am no longer willing to carry the heavy burden of bitterness. Holding on to that anger would mean they still had a piece of me, a foothold in my soul. This was the final act of cutting the cord. I chose grace, not for their sake, but for the sake of my own peace of mind. It was an act of compassion for myself. Standing on my porch now, I look out at the ocean and realize that Operation Homecoming was a success, just not in the way I had originally planned. My initial objective was to expose the guilty and reward the loyal. But the mission evolved. It was never truly about them. It was about me, finding my way back to a home I had never known. A home built on a foundation of self-respect, protected by impenetrable boundaries and filled with the warm, steady light of the people who chose to stay. Loyalty, I finally understood, isn't something you demand from others. It's not a debt you can call in or a transaction you can negotiate. It's something you build for yourself, first. It is the unwavering commitment to honor your own worth, to protect your own peace, and to invest your heart only where the soil is good. And that, right there, is the most valuable inheritance of all. Thank you for sharing this time with me and for listening to my story. My Operation Homecoming has reached its peaceful conclusion, but I know that for many of you, your own journey is just beginning. If my story has taught me anything, it's that building a life of peace starts with the courage to draw your first boundary. In the comments below, I'd be honored if you would share just one word that represents your next step. Maybe it's courage, boundary, or simply peace. Your stories matter. For more true stories that empower and remind us that we are never truly alone, please subscribe to the channel and share this with someone who needs to hear that it's okay to choose yourself. Thank you for being my teammate today.